While Japan was planning to celebrate the coming of the new year, a darker shadow was looming in Setagaya, Tokyo, one that has continued to loom large 25 years after the brutal murder of the Miyazawa family. The Miyazawa family looked like the quintessential Japanese family. The father, Mikio Miyazawa, worked in a marketing company and was described by friends and colleagues as getting along with everyone. The mother, Yasuko Miyazawa, worked as a teacher and was also similarly described as getting along with everyone. She was known as a great mother and would spend a lot of time with the family's two children, their 8-year-old daughter Nina and 6-year-old son Ray. Nina was your typical 8-year-old. She was playful and outgoing. Ray, however, had a speech impairment, and that was causing great concern to the family. The house that the Miyazawas were living in was a duplex, and the next door neighbors were Yasuko's relatives. More on that later. The neighborhood they were living in had dwindled down to a couple of houses due to the fact that the city wanted to expand a park nearby. The Miyazawas were one of the last families still holding out. The family was concerned with how uprooting the family and moving would affect the children. Little did they know that the 30th of December 2000 would be their last. The next day, the mother of Yasuko, Haruko, tried calling the family. However, nobody picked up. She decided to investigate and rang the doorbell. Still, no answer. Upon opening the door with the spare key she had, she would stumble upon what could only be described as a house of horrors. She would discover the body of her son-in-law, Mikio, at the bottom of the staircase. He was stabbed multiple times and dead. She rushed upstairs to see what had happened to the rest of her family. There, she would discover the bodies of Yasuko and Nina, both stabbed but killed in a far more gruesome manner than Mikio. She then proceeded to look for Rei, who was found in his bedroom, strangled to death, the only one not to be stabbed of the family. Tokyo police quickly arrived at the scene and began to try and make sense of what had happened. An eyewitness recalls walking past the house at around 10 p.m. and overhearing what they described as a quarrel between a couple, but nothing more than that. An hour and a half later, the family next door recalls hearing a loud thud. Due to the stab wounds on Mikio's neck, the police theorized that he had been in a scuffle with the attacker. The murder weapon was also left behind, a sashimi knife that was discovered to have been bought at a local store. That same knife was found broken, and a second murder weapon was found from the Miyazawa's own kitchen this time. It was used to kill Yasuko and Nina. The police also noted the gruesome and excessive way the women were murdered, which may have indicated some personal hatred towards women. They alleged that Ray was the first victim of the killer, as he was found strangled in his bed, as to not alarm the others that something was amiss. The most perplexing part of the case is the sheer amount of forensic evidence found at the house. It would actually be easier to just list all the pieces of evidence now. We have both the murder weapons, a gray crusher hat, a hip bag, a purple and white long sleeve shirt, a black Uniqlo AirTag jacket, black Edwin gloves, a scarf with no tags, and a black handkerchief. The killer had also walked all around the house after the murders, leaving bloody footprints, which the police later identified to have come from the brand Slazenger. That size shoe was not sold in Japan, but rather South Korea. More on that later. Terrifyingly, the killer even ate ice cream and drank tea from the family's kitchen. It is also alleged that he even took a nap for a couple of hours after the murders. It was also discovered that he used the bathroom and didn't even bother to flush, which is how police know what his last meal was, a spinach dish containing string beans. Not only that, but he had gathered a bunch of the family's belongings and threw them into the bathtub. No one really knows why. He had even used the Miyazawa's computer by clicking on some of the bookmarked sites and even attempting to buy tickets for a theater show. Perhaps the most interesting part was what police found in the hip bag. In it, they found pieces of grip tape used for the surfaces of skateboards, but they also found traces of a specific male cologne, Dracar Noir. That same cologne was also found on the handkerchief. But by far, the most surprising piece of evidence found inside was sand. Sand that was surprisingly traced back to the area around Edwards Air Force Base in California, which in turn fueled a theory that the perpetrator might have been military stationed in Japan or an army kid. One piece of evidence that lends credence to that theory is the handkerchief, which was found to have been ironed beforehand, something military personnel usually do. Even with all the evidence the killer had left, no concrete suspect has ever been identified. However, certain theories have persisted. But before that, I'd like to outline some of the weird things happening near the Miyazawa residence around the time of the murders. 1. People in the area had reported that mutilated animals were appearing in the local park, cats with their tails cut off, etc. 2. Yasuko had mentioned that a strange car had parked in front of the house on several occasions. 3. Witnesses recall seeing a man in skater clothes several times near the Miyazawa residence, at stations and other places close by. A taxi driver also says he picked up 3 middle-aged men near the residence that night who were very quiet, and one of them had an open wound and ended up bleeding on the backseat of the taxi. This is an interesting detail because the crime scene had the killer's blood all over, which would indicate that the killer had injured himself in the process. Additionally, hours after the bodies were discovered, a man was admitted to a medical center in Tobuniku Station, which is a couple of hours away from Setagaya. The man, believed to be in his 30s, was admitted without giving his name or how he got his hand injury, with the injury being serious enough that bone was showing. Despite that, the man was treated and subsequently released by personnel, not knowing what had occurred just a couple of hours before. There seem to be 4 theories. One is that it was a robbery gone wrong. However, the theory tends to fall apart when you see that the killer had not taken large amounts of money from the house and that he had stayed at the crime scene for hours after. The amount of aggression also doesn't point towards a robbery. 2. Military personnel. This has been the internet's favorite theory, underpinned by the sand in the hip bag and the ironed handkerchief. Also considering that there's an Air Force base located just 40 minutes from Setagaya. The hip bag containing the sand, however, can be explained as something being bought at a thrift store, which was popular in the skateboarding scene at the time. Fingerprints were also never tested against US databases. 3. The Miyazawas might have known their assailant. This theory is an interesting one because Mikio had confronted a bunch of skateboarders at the nearby park for being too loud. But is an argument enough to push someone to kill a family of 4 in such a gruesome manner? 4. In 2015, a book called The Setagaya Family Murder Case was published. In it, the author, Fumiya Ijihashi, alleges that the killer had been ex-South Korean military and that he had traced dirt found at the crime scene to the place where the suspect lived. He also alleges that he had obtained the fingerprints of this South Korean man and that his fingerprints matched perfectly with the ones left at the crime scene. In 2006, testing had evolved to a point where investigators could trace the genetic makeup of the perpetrator. By testing the blood left behind at the house, they were able to assert that he was potentially not a Japanese citizen, but of mixed race. His DNA carried a marker from his father that occurs in 1 out of 13 Japanese, 1 out of 10 Chinese, and 1 in every 5 Koreans. His mother was found to be from Southern Europe. Adding to the physical appearance of the suspect, he is believed to have been around 175 centimeters or around 5'7" and had blood type A. However, even with all this treasure trove of evidence, no concrete suspect has ever been pursued. During the investigation, 250,000 police officers were involved one way or another, and we're still no closer to finding the killer of the Miyazawa family.